Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. Today, we're going to talk about tricky uses of the word epicenter and about the origin of the words brother and bro. But first, I have a quick follow-up to our piece on idioms with the word dime last week, because my husband tells me we missed a big one. During the drop a dime section, he said he kept waiting for me to talk about basketball. So the Oxford English Dictionary says that the basketball use of drop a dime is chiefly North American and goes all the way back to 1988. It means to make a precise or well-timed pass to a teammate for a shot at the basket. So it's essentially an assist, and it's expanded to use in other sports too. Thanks, Pat. I recently asked my social media followers how they felt about the use of the word epicenter in two sentences, one positive and one negative. The positive sentence said the cafe was the epicenter of the neighborhood's social life. And the negative sentence said Wall Street was the epicenter of the financial crisis in 2008. I wanted to know if people thought one use was more acceptable than the other in formal writing, like in a press release or report. Epicenter originally described the point on the Earth's surface directly above an earthquake's focus, but it started taking on metaphorical meaning around 1900, and literary folks have been arguing about it ever since. One question has been whether it's okay to use epicenter for anything other than earthquakes. But there's a second, thornier question. Since earthquakes are bad, should people stick to using epicenter just for bad things? And the responses surprised me. As a group, my social media followers seem less accepting of epicenter in the positive sentence than the American Heritage Dictionary usage panel members were back in 1996. These were the language experts who weighed in on tricky usage questions for the dictionary. And I would have expected them to be far more conservative than modern-day social media commenters, even commenters on a page called Grammar Girl, which would likely skew more linguistically conservative than the general social media population. More than 550 of my LinkedIn followers responded, and if you add up everyone in my survey who accepted the positive sentence in some way, the number was 51%. A smaller number of people replied on Facebook, and they were even less likely to accept the positive use. I don't want to combine the numbers because I asked the question in a slightly different way, so let's just use 50% as the rough number of my followers who were okay with the positive use. It's probably a little high, but it'll work. So in 1996, 62% of the American Heritage Dictionary usage panel approved of a similar positive sentence. 50% of you versus 62% of the experts more than 30 years ago. Many of the people who commented did feel like the word had really strong negative associations. Arizona said her idea of an epicenter is, quote, cause or origination of a disaster, unquote, and that's the only way she'd use it. Christina could only imagine accepting the cafe example if it was followed by descriptions of, quote, fistfights, drunken debauchery, loud music, and frequent police interventions, unquote. Lucas had maybe the clearest way of explaining the problem. He said, quote, don't use negative metaphors for positive situations, and vice versa, unquote. He suggested replacing epicenter with beacon in both sentences to see the difference. To him, epicenters are negative and beacons are positive. So saying Wall Street was the beacon of the financial crisis sounds as weird to him as saying a cafe is the epicenter of a neighborhood's social life. The most interesting thing, though, was that reading through the comments, I discovered a bunch of objections that I hadn't seen in dictionaries or usage guides. Several people objected to not just using epicenter positively, but to using it for small things. An earthquake is a big deal, and some of you think epicenter should be reserved to refer to something that is also a big deal. For example, M.L. Hartman said using epicenter for something as small as a neighborhood cafe was overkill, and Christine called it unnecessarily dramatic. So I can see that. Earthquakes are massive events. If you're going to borrow that metaphor, maybe it should be for something equally significant. The financial crisis? Sure. Your neighborhood cafe? That's like using tsunami to describe spilling your coffee. On the other hand, since we're taking comments from my husband this episode, he counters that most earthquakes are actually small. Now, a follower named Gary actually preferred the positive cafe example to the negative Wall Street example because it referred to a specific physical location, which aligns better with the geological definition. Wall Street, he argued, is more of a concept or general area than an exact spot where something can happen. A follower named Damien didn't like the positive sentence because in his mind, the word epicenter relates to an event rather than an ongoing situation. And finally, there was one true stickler named Doug who wanted to throw out both the positive and negative sentences because technically, an epicenter is on the surface above the earthquake's center, not the actual center itself. So unless you're describing something that's near but not quite at the center, you're using it wrong. And while I appreciate the geological precision, I'd say that ship has sailed. And Brian Garner agrees. Garner's modern English usage says the metaphorical sense of epicenter for a center of devastation is fully accepted. One thing that I feel like does come up when I ask these kinds of questions is that just by asking, I'm giving the impression that there's a problem to be found somewhere. So even if people may not have thought about it before, now they're looking for what could be wrong with one or both of the example sentences. A lot of people did seem to know about the objection to epicenter being used positively, but not everyone. And given the number of people who came up with objections I've never heard before, I do think it's likely that some of them were scrutinizing the examples in search of a problem they might not have noticed in a different, everyday situation. One slight difference in the way I asked the question and the way the usage panel members in 1996 were queried is that the usage panel was asked if they'd use epicenter themselves in edited prose. And I asked my social media followers if they'd tell someone else it was wrong if they'd been asked to review a document. Those are slightly different standards, but if anything, I feel like the usage panel question was more likely to elicit a negative response. I think it's easier to say, nah, I don't like it and wouldn't use it myself, than it is to tell someone else they shouldn't use it. Yet the usage panel, which was commenting on their own use, was still more accepting of the positive use of epicenter. So where does this leave us? Well, if you're writing something formal and you want to use epicenter, you're probably safe with negative contexts. Wall Street is the epicenter of a financial crisis. Most people would be fine with that. But your local coffee shop is the epicenter of community life? Maybe find another word. Garner suggests that center is a perfectly useful word in such sentences. Whether you're calling a male sibling brother or just using the word for someone close enough to feel like one, you're using a word that's had a long history in English. But did you know that modern words like boy and buddy also come from this ancient word? The word brother itself is even older than English, thought to have descended from a long-dead language known as Proto-Indo-European, which existed about 6,000 years ago and was the precursor to not just English, but also languages like Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. In fact, a similar word to brother existed in all three, namely Greek frater, Latin frater, and Sanskrit bratar, all from what has been hypothesized to have been the word brater in their shared Indo-European source language. Though it's hard to know if the word carried any additional sense beyond male sibling in Indo-European, it's clear that by the time it made it into Latin and then English, the word could already refer to figurative and not just literal brothers. This figurative leap beyond actual brotherhood might have gotten started because it was the tribal or kinship bond, rather than exact sibling status, that was the most important sense of the word. Because the closeness of a connection, rather than a specific familial tie, was a focus, it would easily allow the word to be further extended to those united in some fundamental way, for instance, spiritually or in close friendship, even when no blood tie existed. Bro, the short form of brother that seems to be everywhere these days, also has a longer history in English than you might suspect. Bro, followed by a period, is found in written documents as early as the 16th century, where it was used as an abbreviated spelling for the full word brother, though people would have pronounced the full word when reading it aloud. It isn't until the 19th century that people actually say bro, first typically as part of an animal or person's name, as in bro rabbit, as written in dialogue from 1832, or Bro Bill, appearing in 1865. By the early 20th century, bro by itself began to be used as a greeting among men, or in reference to a fellow man, particularly in Caribbean or South African American varieties of English. For example, we find an early 20th century example of bro, I can't go, I sick bad. An example in the Oxford English Dictionary from a collection of stories by inhabitants of an island in the Bahamas in 1918. Modern pronunciations like bra and bruh are also not as new as you might think. They, too, appear to be different regional ways of saying brother, found as far back as the 19th century, and are mainly used in Caribbean, Hawaiian, and African American communities. While the relationship between these shortened forms of brother is pretty obvious, less obvious is the relationship between brother and the words boy and buddy. Let's start with the word boy, a word that already followed a bit of a strange path over the history of English. It didn't show up until the 13th century and was first used as a term for a male servant. It finally arrived at its modern meaning, that of a male child, around the 15th century. I'm sure anyone who had a lot of chores assigned as a kid might see the connection, but the fact that it was often used with a derogatory sense early in its history does suggest it's undergone quite an improvement in meaning. Its origin is a bit murky, and there are several completely different theories about how it came into English, including suggestions that it was from a Germanic-based proper name, boya, that was found in Old English, or, alternatively, that it was a borrowing from Old French. But even farther back, in terms of its earliest or original source, a widely discussed theory is that it comes from baby talk, namely a toddling attempt to pronounce some version of the linguistically challenging word brother, or more likely its Proto-Indo-European counterpart. Since the B sound is a very frequent sound babbled by babies, while R is not, this would give rise to bo or bobo as a baby word, also explaining Bube, meaning boy in German, as well as similar B or P words for boy found across non-Germanic languages like Persian or Latin. How it got from a meaning of brother to one of male servant is unclear, but it may be that young males were often the ones inhabiting the role of servants, and voila, boy became a way of referring to them. Finally, we get to the word buddy, which, like modern brother, is often used today in casual conversation to address someone considered a friend or sometimes even a stranger, as in, hey buddy, how's it going? Buddy's origin, like boy, is not that clear, but some people think it could be a regional pronunciation of the word brother, perhaps coming from the addition of a Y suffix on the brother-like pronunciation used by some people in the Caribbean. Dating back to the late 1700s, people have used buddy informally to address a friend or a pal, and starting in the 1800s, sometimes people also used it as a casual way to refer to a brother. With the exception of boy, the takeaway here from how these words have all evolved seems to be that brotherhood has long been understood not just to be the result of blood ties, but of the fellowship and shared experiences that make us all part of a larger brotherhood or sisterhood of being human. That segment was written by Valerie Friedland, a professor of linguistics at the University of Nevada in Reno and the author of Like Literally, Dude, Arguing for the Good in Bad English. You can find her at valeriefriedland.com. Finally, I have a Familect story.
I have a Familect for you. In Wisconsin, where I live, lots of cities have names related to indigenous words, and they're often similar, multisyllable with a hard K sound. And one day years ago, my family was in the car headed toward Oconomowoc, which is north. So when my husband started driving south, I said, I thought we were going to Oconomowoc. And he said, we are, but Oconomowoc is north, I said, and it looks like you're driving to Mukwonago. And he just shrugged and said, Mukwonago, Oconomowoc. And so now, when anyone in our family mistakes one word for another, we all just shrug and say, Mukwonago, Oconomowoc.
Thank you. Wherever you were going, I hope you made it. If you want to share the story of your Familect, a word or phrase you use with your family, leave a message on the voicemail line at 833-214-GIRL, or leave a voice message on WhatsApp, and you'll find those in the show notes. Grammar Girl is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Thanks to Morgan Christianson in advertising, Holly Hutchings, director of podcasts, Nat Hoops in marketing, Dan Feierabend in audio, and Rebekah Sebastian in marketing, who says her parents wanted to name her India, but her grandfather said if she was going to be named after a country, it had to be Italy. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl, and author of the Tip-A-Day book, The Grammar Daily. That's all. Thanks for listening.